Jack, please, it's your time now, okay? Jack știe că el avea prezentarea într-o altă zi, dar l-au anunțat ieri în mașină, în alea 45 de minute, când mi s-au întors toate prezentările cu capul în jos, ca să spun așa. Toată lumea va fi aici, doar că nu în ordinea la care v-ați așteptat. Jack, sorry? No, I said, no, I just said something bad about you, but it's okay, no? Okay.
Good afternoon. Again, if I can, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. While Doro puts up my slide, and I'll take this. And I'm going to move over to the middle, so I can kind of see everybody, if you don't mind. And when this comes up, what a title, huh? Doru sent me a note and said, this is what I want you to talk about.
Just a second. Trebuie să vă spun ceva. În stilul meu caracteristic, vreau multe. Nu numai de la mine, ci și de la colegii mei și de la angajații mei. Drept urmare, această cercetare a fost încheiată cu forța acum 3 zile. Succes!
To success. Thank you. Okay. Just starting out, the title of this little piece, it's actually a piece of research that was conducted on how to manage jerks, prima donnas, divas, and hotheads. I don't know if that all translates well into Romanian, but I have a few questions as we start here. Number one, and we'll get into this a little later, but how many in here would say they're a jerk? Okay. How many prima donnas do we have? No? Okay. Any divas?
Me.
Ah, there's one in the back. Another over here. I know a few others, but I won't tell you who they are. And any hotheads in the group? Okay. Well, there are a few that admit to it. And that's an interesting point that we'll come back to later. How many of you are married or in a significant relationship? Okay. How many have children? Okay. How many of you have a boss? And how many of you have subordinates? Okay. I can guarantee you the answer to the next question, and that is, how many of you have had experience dealing with a jerk, a prima donna, a diva, or a hothead? Okay? Just about everybody. And we will see, I'm actually now seeing it in managing grandchildren. I did hear a reference to age a little while ago, and you know, in my coming over here now for the 7th time in 8 years. It's a really a distinct pleasure for me. I haven't really changed that much in that time, other than maybe gotten a little grayer so that people can assume that I know what I'm talking about. But at any rate, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the Profiles Research Institute, which was founded by Profiles International a couple of years ago, and it was the brainchild of Dario Priolo, who is actually our Chief Marketing Officer at Profiles International. His experience relates back to, he had experience with the Hay Group in marketing and sales there. More recently, he was with Miller Hyman, which I'm not sure how familiar a name that is in Romania, but they are very well known in North America and in many other countries, a number of European countries, for their sales training programs for sales executives. And among other things that he's done, including having a team that created a wonderful graphic like that, Dario did pick up this idea and bring it to the forefront that we were doing a lot of research, and we found that we were getting into a number of things. And he said, why don't we have a research institute? And so we have a separate website, actually. It's in very small print down here. It's www.profilesresearch.com. And we do conduct research there, as well as present some of the findings, both there and on our main website. But it's very interesting to use as a vehicle for collecting information. Just a little bit about Profiles. You all know Doru, and you know what Profiles does in Romania. We really get into just about everything from the pre-screening and job matching and onboarding of employees, and into managing performance and even maximizing the potential of the people that you may be working with. Some of the issues that we've tackled in the Research Institute, in addition to managing divas and hotheads, we have briefings and documents that have been published on topics like building great teams and cultivating effective leaders, and developing employees, improving frontline management. Sometimes that's an area that gets a little ignored. Reducing conflict, theft, absenteeism, and those kinds of things in the workplace, as well as dealing with supporting the management of talent and salespeople, and dealing with the overall issue of productivity. I think one of the other ones that we've produced is called the 8 Signs of Incompetent Managers. Little things that you could be on the lookout for as you go along in your day. And what I'd like to present today is a little bit of research that was conducted. In this presentation, we're really getting at the issue of, in terms of what drives productivity. You find productivity as a function of both the technology and the processes and the systems and those kinds of issues on one hand, and then I sound like an economist. On the one hand, you have this, and then on the other hand, you have people. You have systems and processes, and then you have people. And people, the human brain does not like to be categorized quite so exactly as you might see in a process or in a machine. The human brain is not quite that exact. So you have this equation that deals with both of those areas, and of course we work on the side of people and people management and how to get the most out of people in their work. And there's a balance also. Everybody knows that in the area of performance and performance management, you always have the issue of dealing with the skills and the abilities and those kinds of things, responsibilities that are demanded of the job, which is defined as tasks and duties and responsibilities and that sort of thing. That's pretty basic, and we all deal with that on a day-to-day basis. But as industry has moved forward, we've gotten away from an autocratic type of a management, social framework in the business environment. It used to be that if someone dreamed up an assessment and they gave it to an employee, they would know nothing about the employee. They would find out about the boss, because an employee they would only respond the way they think their boss wanted to hear it. And that was because of a very autocratic management structure in most businesses. We've gotten away from that now. And we're now moving into an era where it's not just that you require something of someone, but they have to be willing to contribute. It's almost like you have to try to attract them to do things for you. Just to make sure I'm on the right page. So our goal in this little piece learn how companies are rising to the challenge of dealing with high performers, believe it or not. Because we're finding in today's day and age, there are costs as well as benefits from having very high performing individuals working for you. Companies feel that need, regardless of their personality, to hire and retain the top performers. And sometimes, while they may be increasing the productivity and performance because they are top performers, they actually also may be, or the company may be, incurring some costs of that because it has an impact on other people. And it has an impact on the organization in dealing with these people. And looking at that goal, and there was one little quote that we thought was good, and that is, today's workplaces definitely are overrun with prima donnas and divas, and we seem to just live with these difficult personalities. That was one of the comments that came out of the research from one of the participants. It's a very interesting world we live in today. So the objectives to reach our goal were in terms of three primary areas. We wanted to identify the prevalence of difficult high performers in the workplace and how do they influence the organization. Secondly, we wanted to uncover the sources of challenges that companies face. Get to the source. Where are they coming from when they're trying to deal with managing high performers? So we've got the prevalence and the challenges and then the coping. How does an organization cope with all of this in terms of some of the difficult personalities? Our research center posted a very simple survey, and we had campaigns to drive people to that. And in terms of looking at the research itself, it was voluntary. So this isn't like some polls that you might read and so forth. There's a certain amount of just voluntary response to this. But at the same time, the respondents were pretty well evenly spread between what we would say a small company with less than 50 employees, a medium-sized company as defined by employees from 50 to 499, and then over 500 as the larger organizations. And the respondents were about evenly split between those three size groups of companies. Interestingly enough, and I'll present these at the beginning, there were some quotes or some anecdotal types of responses that we also collected along the way, because someone could enter in some text as well and give some comments. And one of the things we found was that people commented that high performers tend to have unusual requirements to keep them motivated. Does that sound strange? I think you're going to find that as we go through, you'll find confirmation of a lot of this in your, as we go through. It also, we had a respondent that said a difficult high performer tends to be left alone unless their behavior becomes outrageous and aggressive. In other words, I'm not going to upset the apple cart, as we would say. I'm not going to try to alter this person's behavior or do anything as long as they don't upset the organization. Okay? Another person responded that sometimes we don't understand when difficult behavior slips into the realm of unmanageable behavior. And this is a very touchy area for a lot of managers because it's what we call a slippery slope. You tolerate a little bit, and you tolerate a little bit more. And so there's a little bit of disruption here and there because you have a high performer who's, very, very distinctly different from the rest of the group. But somehow you kind of let it go until it finally slips over the edge and it gets to a point where you really say, this is getting unmanageable. How many people have been there? Yeah, I've been there, for sure. The issue of, here was one respondent, our high performers do earn special treatment, regardless of being difficult or not. In other words, there's always something special that high performers seem to get or ask for or be offered that sets them apart. Part of being a high performer is I want to be recognized as a high performer. You know, I don't have to do this. We have in our office now, we have security badges that we have to wear. And there's one individual who often is without his badge. And it's because he kind of gets away with it. And, you know, you get to the point where, okay, at what point do you say it's tolerable, and at what point does it become a disruption to others, because other people will do that. And they'll start putting funny faces on it instead of their picture, and they'll start doing other things. And pretty soon, that once tolerated behavior by one person can spread to a number of people, and you kind of lose your management capability in terms of the company. One person said, we just seem to live with our difficult personalities. I live with several difficult personalities every day. I've got several. Okay. You know, and everybody says, well, the really difficult ones get let go. Because if they destroy the morale in the company, they're doing more damage than they are good. And if they're not dealt with, well, something has to happen. I mentioned this before. Today's workplaces seem to be more, we seem to be seeing more prima donnas and divas, people who want special attention. And I'm not sure, and of course the research isn't, you know, going that deep, but this is true more so than ever before. And is it a general cultural evolution or a change? Some think so. You know, everybody looks at the next generation and say, well, we were never like that. And then sometimes they're reminded that they really were. But at the same time, with a less structured working environment in many companies, it gets harder to manage when you have a lot of individuals out there and they all want special attention. As long as they're high performers, it doesn't seem to bother a lot of people, but they do. But it does bother them, but they let it go. This person said, what I see to be the most common tendency is that the difficult high performer is usually left alone, and their bosses are reluctant to address their being difficult for fear of losing that person. That's a very common reaction from managers. I can live with this because I can't live without him or her. And particularly in today's environment where you may be concerned about being able to hire someone to come in and replace that person. The managing style where the supervisor or manager is the boss and the subordinate has no say in anything causes 90% of the problems. That was a person responding to what I also talked about earlier, and that is there are a lot of people, particularly in the manufacturing environments and so forth, where you're very process-oriented, and you're seeing now in many countries also, such as Singapore, Malaysia, where I remember once I was told that in Malaysia that assessments won't work here because whatever you give someone, they're only going to tell you what their boss thinks, because it was a very autocratic type of environment. And that is something that does have a very strong impact. So let's take a look at some of the questions that were asked in the research on an individual basis. Number one, we asked, well, how big is this problem or issue? What percentage of high performers in your organization have difficult personalities? By the way, some researchers come up with convoluted graphs, and I couldn't read this extremely well because it's percentages against percentages, and they said that down below. Figures above are in percentages, and I went, wait a minute. But basically, when you look at it, it was explained to me that more than half the survey participants claimed that at least 25% of the high performers in their organization had difficulties in terms of difficult personalities. So, half of the survey participants said that there were at least 25% of their top performers who were very difficult to manage or had difficult personalities. Now, we need to look at the implication of that. The personal qualities that make some employees difficult also are some of the qualities that make them successful in their job. A high-performing sales representative, for example, might be focused on achieving their goals, but they may be wreaking havoc in the organization, and there may be costs elsewhere. Everybody loves to pick on financial analysts, that they might, you might have one that's so detail-oriented that he has a difficult time adjusting to change. When you make changes in the department, it upsets him a great deal, or changes in his procedures or processes, because he kind of follows a plan. That sometimes is a trait that you see in someone who is a good financial analyst. So it's always important to understand why individuals respond in a particular manner. And if that behavior is conducive to success with the organization's cultural boundaries. In other words, something that makes you successful might also contribute to disruption in the workplace. And it may be very costly, and you may not know how much that's costing you. So it's always important to keep in mind that when you have a difficult employee, it may not just be the difficult employee and their performance. It has broader implications. You'll love this one. We asked, what roles do your difficult high performers play in your organization? Of your top performers, the people who are your high performance people, where are the most difficult ones found? Well, where are the cowboys? We like to call the salespeople cowboys, okay? Because they kind of go out and do their own thing, and they come in and they say, I just made this big sale, go fill out the paperwork. I don't have time for that. Okay, so you figure out, call this person, get it all down, and they want to move on to the next challenge. That may not have been the plan for the sales department, but they're surely doing that for that salesperson, if he's a top performer. Operations. Seems in a lot of operations areas there's an awful lot of people. And these are the two areas in companies where you find the most prevalent, the highest prevalence of top performers who are also difficult, okay? Looking at the prima donnas in the group. So, other groups, it's interesting that, HR is down near the bottom. Finance, marketing, HR, IT, purchasing. The staff functions tend not to have as many prima donnas and difficult people. Now, that may not be many in number, but it could be even more disruptive if those staff departments are the ones that are driving the processes in the company. Because if things get out of kilter in some processes, it can be extremely difficult. So just because there's a lower prevalence of having people report this, and by the way, it would be interesting as we continue to collect research, because we have several research surveys that go on at Profiles Research, and at the same time. And so we do keep collecting data, and so this was collected and summarized a few months ago. So it's interesting. We'll see how it continues to develop. The third question we asked people was, is it acceptable for managers to give special treatment to high performers, to difficult ones? And a little over a quarter of the people said yes, but almost 3/4 responded saying no. They really don't think that's acceptable. So they note that it's a little, actually there's a little bit of a correlation between that and question number 1 in terms of the percentage of difficult people in the workplace. But as a manager, the last message a manager wants to send to his employees is that bad behavior is rewarded with personal consideration. You know, that's one of those things that sometimes creates a little bit of disruption in the workplace. But some special treatment is generally acknowledged. Everybody wants to be special in their own way, maybe acknowledging, you know, certain things that have helped enable their success. But you want to do it in a way that does not adversely impact the rest of the organization. We asked, how many managers know what makes our high performers successful? How many people know what makes our high performers successful? Here it was almost split down the middle. So only half, actually less than half, of the managers surveyed could identify what makes a high-performing employee successful. That was kind of a shocker to me. The implication of that is that they need to know what makes their high performers successful in order to be able to key in on hiring the right kind of people as they fill positions and similar positions going forward. And understanding the success factors, this really supports the theory that everyone in this room would understand, that you really have to understand what the job is and what are the particular traits or the characteristics that will help a person naturally be able to perform that job in a satisfactory manner. But a lot of times it was based on anecdotal evidence, shall we say. It's like asking someone who's a hiring manager, and I remember one that I worked with when I was much younger in my career. The question was asked, how do you identify, someone who's really good that you're interviewing? How do you make some of those choices, between these 3 candidates? And he said, I know a good one when I see him. And it was that old gut feel. I'll know. And of course, he didn't know that he was interviewing someone on a Friday and making sure that he got that offer to the person because he needed him in the office on Monday, and that person's evil twin showed up on Monday. It's like, how did I miss this? Well, your gut feel isn't very good in terms of giving you empirical information. It's giving you your gut feel. We really need to go deeper than that. Anecdotes really aren't good enough. We asked these respondents, the managers, saying, our managers understand why their difficult high performers behave the way they do. We understand why they behave the way they do. Now, these are high performers. And only 1/3 of the managers in this survey agreed with that statement. So they really are admitting that they really don't understand fully what makes that person a high performer. You can guess, and you can say, well, this person seems really assertive. I bet that must help him close a lot of sales. Well, that one's not too far of a stretch to guess. But at the same time, depending on the type of sales position, that may be someone who will turn off potential clients more than they will get them to say yes. Because that kind of a salesperson, for example, who's that assertive, might not work well in a cooperative sales type of situation where you may have 2 or 3 people trying to put their heads together to approach a client. They've got different talents to bring to bear, and they need to do it in a and show that potential client how they can do what the client wants them to do in a very successful manner. But what they did also notice was that they understand that general behavior is more important in this post-autocratic management environment. If you really do know more about what makes them tick, you can predict and respond. Another question was, are managers manage difficult people effectively? Well, they didn't give themselves very good grades for that one. 1/4 of them said yes, and 3/4 said no, that they're really not able to effectively manage these people. They're top performers, but they don't manage them. They just kind of let them go. This is a challenge that's particularly difficult for inexperienced managers. I mentioned one of the pieces of research we did was on frontline management, the initial supervisory type positions where people often don't get a lot of training, and it's the first time they've been thrown into a position where they have to be responsible for and manage and train other people. And that's where a lot of companies struggle the most, because they don't have adequate training for frontline supervisors. And a lot of times it's also because they have nothing to give the frontline supervisor about these employees they're hiring. And it was generally noticed that these people, high performers, managing them is really, really a challenge for these inexperienced types of managers. They tend to overreact, be a little heavy-handed with some of their punishments or reprimands, because they feel like they have to take control of the situation, and they don't have enough gray hair or maturity as a manager to really be able to handle that effectively. They're like what we call, they look at you like a deer caught in the headlights, like, what do I do now? When they're challenged. And that's because their only reaction is, I must take control of the situation. And whether it's a good decision or bad decision, they will mete out some punishment or do something that may not be totally appropriate. Where does that end up? It ends up back in your hands, because now there's a complaint that somebody did something inappropriate as a manager, at least in the States you do, because this manager did something that they shouldn't, because they just didn't have a clue how to manage this employee. And it's like, managers also need to understand a little bit more about themselves, as well as knowing about the employees they're managing. We got into a cost analysis question, and we didn't ask for specific costs, but we asked the question of them, or to respond to the statement, I should say, the cost of managing difficult high performers exceeds the benefit. And guess what? 50-50. Some people said, it's too costly. We need to just, if we have somebody, I don't care if they're in the top 5% of my sales group, he or she is wreaking havoc in the organization, and it's negatively impacting other salespeople. It's negatively impacting productivity in maybe some of the other areas where they touch in the organization. And many people say, they're guessing again, and and some people come back with the comment that, hey, everybody's replaceable. And it's tempting just to say, yep, let's get rid of them. I just can't deal with this anymore. But that may also not be the best decision, particularly in something like, we hear it a lot in sales groups. Because if that person is a high performer and you let him go, where's the first stop that he makes? To the competition. He understands that industry, he understands the products or services that you're selling, and lo and behold, you get comments back that, well, guess what? So-and-so is out, selling against us now. So it can be costly in that regard. But it also could come back to haunt you in another way, and that is you may not know how much that really is costing you, and there may not be a very good way to estimate it, but most people recognize that there's cost involved. So you've lost a productive employee, maybe he's gone to your competition, he or she, and therefore you're now in a position where you've got to make up for that. Well, what do most companies do to help better manage the difficult high performer? The diva that always needs attention, or the hothead that's always exploding in a meeting. How do they work with those people? Most people responded, individual coaching is the response and choice, it seems. And it's generally recognized that that's also more appropriate to do individually, because it's also very difficult to do it in a group. Number one, coaching on something like that would be anyway, but secondly, if you've got the one that's difficult to manage in with other people and you're trying to address it as a group, that can create havoc as well. So group training, I was surprised by this one, that 30% said group training. To me, that sometimes is dangerous when you're dealing with difficult behavior, because all they're going to do is display that to all of the rest of your group, whether they've seen it already or not, or know what happens. But individual coaching is big. And I don't know about Romania, but individual coaching is also a big industry in and of itself in a lot of the industrial world. So a lot of people are getting into individual coaching, and we'll talk next about, well, what does that mean, individual coaching? What are they doing with it? About a quarter of the people responded that they use some form of personality assessments. And I think one of the implications of that was that it is important to know the objectives and the motives and the communication styles of everybody that, in the group before the coaching begins. And by the way, you will, as Doro mentioned, you'll get a copy of all this, so you'll be able to read through this in a more relaxed environment. But the benefits of turning a difficult high performer into just a high performer is worth the time and energy, as most people like, because they're spending a lot of time and energy on it. And generally, about a quarter of these people recognize that personality type assessments are good in terms of helping the manager manage his time and energy, because if 55% are getting more and more into individual coaching, where is that manager spending all of his time? Coaching all of his employees. And who gets all of the attention? Well, the ones that are, as we say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So therefore, they're getting a lot of attention. The manager is spending more and more time on individual coaching, and therefore the manager needs some kind of a tool that's a little bit more objective than gut feel, and the manager also needs a tool that's something that can help him save time in the process of coaching, and that's very important. So then let's go from the manager's side. Let's go back the other way. We asked them to respond to this. We provide our difficult high performers in which of the following to work better with others? Well, again, individual coaching was probably the most prevalent in terms of benefit to the employee. Group training, again, still hard in a group. Still in around the quarter of a group was between group training and personality assessments. And it's always noted that, calling out that kind of behavior in a group session or a group environment it can be what we call a recipe for disaster because you're just inviting something to happen in front of the whole group. Yet at the same time, when you, as an HR function or as a company, you say, well, we use assessments in hiring, and they weren't even thinking about using that same information when it came to managing or developing those employees. Giving a copy of a report to a manager after they've hired a person. As a matter of fact, in one situation, I asked someone, because they said, oh, we're using an assessment. We use one with everybody we hire. It's in our processes, and it's all taken care of. And I said, great, what do you do with the reports after you hire the person? And this was an HR director. He said, well, I think it's in the personnel file. Well, did the manager that you sent this employee down, you hired them, and maybe the manager was involved in the interview, maybe not. Maybe they were involved in seeing an assessment on the individual in the hiring process, maybe not. But what usually happens is whether they did or didn't, 3 months later, it doesn't matter because that information is gone from that manager's head. That manager doesn't remember any assessment information about that individual. And if there were a way for them to use that more effectively as a management tool, as a training tool, and as a development tool, it would be an eye-opener. The other thing is it reduces some of the risk in dealing with this difficult behavior of a top performer, because what happens when you get into talking about personality or interests or how does this person go about communicating with other people, you sometimes then tread into personal style. And that's what the difficult employee starts to think. Well, now you're criticizing me, not for my performance. I'm a good performer. Why are you criticizing the way I go about working with people? If I'm effective and I do a good job, and then it gets into a very difficult session with that person. And a manager, it's easier for a manager to sit down with an employee who may have some traits that show up in an assessment. And it may have a great impact on how they behave on the job, but somehow it's an awful lot easier when the manager can sit down and say, you know, in this assessment, you come across as being very energetic and very assertive. And that sometimes can hamper your effectiveness because sometimes you're too quick to jump on something and you're not giving other people in the room a chance to catch up with you. And all of a sudden, it's not personal now. You're not criticizing someone because of the fact that you think that they do that. It's that you're looking at something that's an objective, a more objective measure of that person's behavior. And most people, I think all of you who use assessments know that if you give an individual report to a person, most people will recognize that's who they are. They may quibble with maybe a score or maybe a description. Or I had someone where for a particular trait there were like 8 comments about them, and they said, this one right here is not me. I said, okay. What about the comments in general? And sure enough, that was a little bit more tolerable then, because they said, okay, yeah. I said, the computer didn't recognize who you were, and so they kind of made a mistake. That one comment may not be relevant to you, but if you put it in a different context, would it be you? Yeah, I guess so. The other one that always kills me is when you say, someone says, oh, this is not me at all. Have your husband read it. Have your wife read it, or your best friend, your uncle, somebody who knows you and you trust. And then the comment comes back, yeah, that's you. Gee, that's interesting. One of the other questions we asked as we got further down in this, we're getting near the end here, for managers, whether they actually use the personality profiles in some form in terms of managing difficult performers. And this was what I was talking about earlier, that only about 1 in 5 ever really uses that kind of information when they're dealing with people. This really gets at the heart of the issue. I started into it a few minutes ago. Most people, again, when something happens, an inexperienced manager will jump into the fray, sometimes make a snap judgment that they really shouldn't. They should sit back, let it sit, maybe. On the other hand, there are some things that if they sit back and let it sit, it's not the right way to do it. You have to take action. In the U.S., we always get that with if somebody's doing something illegal or improper or that type of thing, you do not ignore it. I mean, I don't know about Romanian business law or human resource law, but in the U.S., that's something that we have to be very careful about. But the whole idea was that if you have assessments and finding out that 1 out of 5 managers is not really using anything and they use it maybe in the selection process and then move on, they're missing an awfully good opportunity to have objective information about the people. On the recipient side, our high performers, even the difficult ones, receive personality profiles to work better with others. This is where I was getting into it before. Again, 1 out of 5, or 1 out of 4, I guess, between that, 23% agreed that their top performers that were difficult, they got some assessment information and it helped them in terms of how they can work better with other people. And 9 times out of 10, it's communication, it is how you're working with other people, and it can be very difficult. How many people in the room today have something that they can use, or that they do use, some way to compare people against each other in terms of looking at how they interact with others? Whether it's a style indicator, a team analysis, or something like that. How many people here today use assessment information on comparing the results of people? So you get more of an effect. Good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to see it. Because that's also something new in a lot of assessments that they used to provide. Here's who this person is. And now, and if you were really interested, you took the two and you set them side by side and you did your own work. Now, you have the ability with many, many different products in the market to be able to go in and draw something that might be a team, or it might be just 2 individuals. And you'll be able to really tune in on why do these two have such a difficult time working together. Sometimes it may be a boss and a subordinate. And they think, the boss thinks that subordinate is doing something to undermine his or her authority. Or you're making me look bad. Okay? The subordinate thinks the boss is being too demanding. I do what he or she says, I get it done on time, but somehow it's not good enough. And they're in it against me. Everybody takes things personally. And the easiest way to get some of the person out of personality in those types of squabbles is to be able to rely on a little bit something more objective, where you can say, you know what? This is how your behavior is being observed. If it's like a 360 or something like that with managers. Or if it's an assessment on the individual, it can really be more objective than just what they get themselves. Again, better than gut feel. There was a question about our managers being knowledgeable about our policy towards workplace violence and harassment. I don't know whether that's a big deal here. Are any lawyers in the room, people who deal with, in the United States, in the UK, and a lot of European countries, there are lots and lots of issues about what you can and cannot do when dealing with people. But you do have issues of company liability if you foster a situation that results in any kind of unreasonable lashing out. We had some instances several years ago in the United States, and with a couple of postal workers, and now everybody says, "Oh, he went postal." Well, that happens periodically, and was it, quote, caused by the company environment? A lot of people love to jump on lawsuits. So most of the people there agreed that they understood what they have to deal with in terms of their legal and labor unions and all kinds of structures. So, interesting piece of research. And from that, we put together a little list, and there's even a separate piece on this as well, as far as the top practices of managing a difficult employee. So here are some of the do's and don'ts that we came up with that are pretty generic, I think. One, have a discussion about the problem at a meeting with the employees involved. If it's two employees that are having an issue with each other or whatever, you've got to have that discussion. Best to have a one-on-one discussion. If you've got a sole, renegade in the group, a difficult top performer, one-on-one's better than doing anything in a group, even if they're disrupting the group, because they'll do it in that session. Find out from your peers, other managers, your boss. You're not the first one that's gone down this road. You can advise your managers of this, in your function as HR people. Write clearer guidelines for the employee. If there's something they're doing in their behavior that's causing a disruption, you need to be specific and clear. You're going to have to make yourself available for additional training. Provide the employee with outside training. So between yourself doing some coaching, now sometimes coaching is difficult for the boss to do with a difficult employee. They're not going to trust you as a coach necessarily. There may be some hurt feelings there. So sometimes that doesn't work, so you need to consider outside training as well. Even if they're not scheduled for an official performance review, you may want to schedule one anyway to trigger this kind of a conversation. Dealing with someone who is stepping outside the bounds can sometimes be solved also when you make the ground rules clear. Have them report to you regularly on what they're doing, so you can make sure that if they're supposed to be changing how they go about something, that they're doing it. Or at least they're telling you that they're doing it, and they aren't. And they say, "Oh yes, now I'm making sure that I go to accounting before I say okay to this sale, because I've got to make sure that the pricing was approved." Instead of being the top salesman because they go out and negotiate their own deals outside the boundaries that they were allowed to price. How many people have run into that with salespeople? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. In the U.S. it happens. I wouldn't have gotten the sale if I didn't come down to this price, or restructure the quantities in this manner. And you're left to say, well, I guess we have to live with it. They made the commitment to the customer. Well, if you laid down the ground rule, no, you've got to go to Mary in accounting or John in pricing to get that approval before you go ahead. And they say, yep, did that. Well, that's something that you can check. And if they didn't, Well, now they've lied to you. So now you have another issue to deal with that difficult employee. That can lead to probation or any other kinds of appropriate disciplinary actions you have. And obviously, if someone's really getting out of control, you may have to terminate the employee. I mean, these are pretty standard, but and they weren't part of the research. We weren't asking people, as to what these things were. But these were things that have been put together from various sources over time about how do you deal with a problem employee. And there is another briefing on that we've done, by the way. Putting all this together, it shows you that there is yet another, or there are lots of different ways to use assessments in your business. I know I have strong feelings about that because I am in the assessment business. But it seems to me that having something more objective, I get very passionate about that because having something more objective to work with in evaluating the fitness for a job, shoot, if it's an accounting job, you're going to check their accounting degree or maybe their certification with the Accountants Society and those kinds of things. When it comes to other things, well, try to get as much objective information as you can, and you can match that to the job. I get very passionate about that because I've been aided by that in my career. And there's always that person that someone says, we almost didn't hire Jack because he was so quiet in the interview. We just weren't sure he was bright enough. We didn't think he could be up to the job. We hired him anyway, and 6 months later, he's our top performer. And it's just because they relied on the fact that they could look at his grades when he was in school. But even more so, they had an assessment that gave them a sense of the cognitive ability of the person and how that ranked or fit with the job. And it's amazing how many stories you find about that. Now, having finished, does anybody have a little bit better idea about what we might do in the organization with our divas and our prima donnas? Okay, if anybody wants to ask a specific question, I didn't conduct the research, but I'm happy to give you my opinion anytime.
E o întrebare acolo sau mi s-a părut? Nu. Facem altfel. Cine pune o întrebare, primește un breloc. Gratis. Știu, aveți unul, dar gândiți-vă că aveți două dacă întrebați. We have a question, we'll have a presence. Yeah.
Well, then we get to have a break.
Okay. You finished?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank you to Chuck because before your time. But I want to ask you to thank you to Chuck because he arrived yesterday and the presentation was today, not tomorrow. And he's completely tired because it's only 8 hours change time. Only. This means that Chuck just wake up. If you want to talk more with Chuck and to see the all possibility of Chuck, don't forget welcome dinner 8 o'clock, 8th floor, 8 different kind of foods or 8 other nice people which will help us to feel good. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.